The wind shrieked outside Emily Parker's cabin, rattling the old window panes like ghostly fingers trying to claw their way in. Snow scythed sideways in the darkness, burying the world in a white silence broken only by the howling blizzard and the groaning of the ancient pines. It was the kind of storm that could swallow a person whole, a night when nothing sane should move beyond the warm circle of lamplight. Yet Emily couldn't sleep. She rarely did. She stood at the edge of her bed, the battered digital clock blinking 2:13 a.m., its dim green glow casting strange shadows across the knotty pine walls. Her hands moved through the familiar rituals, checking the stove, testing the locks, glancing at the emergency lanterns stacked in the corner. Her movements precise and practiced. A remnant of a different life. A different Emily. The cabin, nestled deep in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, was both her fortress and her prison. Every detail had been shaped by necessity, by the quiet war she waged against memories that refused to die. In Iraq, she'd been Sergeant Parker, Army medic, the steady hands in the middle of chaos. Now she was just Emily, 39 years old, insomnia's captive, haunted by a past that snapped at her heels with every gust of wind. Tonight, something was different. The unease had a weight to it, pressing against the glass as if it wanted in. Emily paced, her bare feet nearly silent on the wooden floor, when a sound caught her. A scratching, desperate and raw, barely audible above the storm's rage. She froze. The sound came again. Claws on wood, whimpers, a cry nearly smothered by the snow. She felt her heart stutter, instinct battling with fear. She had built her world on boundaries, keeping everything dangerous locked outside. But something in that sound, a wild, pleading edge, cut through her armor. Gun in hand, she edged toward the door. For a moment she hesitated, breath fogging in the frigid air leaking under the threshold. Memories flickered, nightmares of sand and blood, the stink of burning oil, the echo of wounded soldiers calling her name. Her hand shook just a little. "Not now," she whispered, forcing herself to focus. She cracked the door open. Snow whipped into her face, stinging her skin, blinding her. Then, through the swirl, a shape emerged, a German shepherd, massive, fur dusted with ice, eyes bright and unblinking. The dog moved with a ghost-like grace, head low, posture wary but unafraid. Behind him, two other dogs huddled, nearly buried by the drifts. One barely conscious, her pale fur streaked with something dark and sticky. Blood. Emily's pulse hammered. She recognized the signs of shock, trauma, frostbite. These weren't strays. Something in their bearing, their gear, the way they watched her with silent intelligence. These dogs had seen things. The lead shepherd pressed closer to the threshold, his gaze locking on hers, not begging, but demanding. "Save us!" Her training flared. She moved fast, voice low and sure, so. "Easy. It's okay. Come in, come in." The shepherd entered first, head held high, flank brushing her leg. The second dog, a shaggy mix with bright, worried eyes, nudged the wounded female inside, licking her muzzle, urging her to stay awake. The scent of wet fur, blood, and fear filled the tiny space. Emily bolted the door. Her hands shook, but not from cold. She cleared the table, spreading out towels and grabbing her battered medic kit. The same one she'd carried through a dozen hellish nights in Ramadi. The shepherd hovered at her elbow, muscles tense, ears flicking at every sound. She glanced down and saw the flash of something on his collar. An insignia, military. Her world contracted to the present moment. Trauma care, triage, action. The wounded dog, female, medium-sized, deep gash along her side, shivered uncontrollably. Emily worked fast. IV line improvised from old tubing, antibiotics from her emergency stash. pressure bandage held tight by the shepherd's steadying weight. The blizzard's roar faded, replaced by the frantic rhythm of Emily's heartbeat, the ragged breath of the dogs, the hiss of the kettle coming to boil. Time blurred. She spoke to herself, to the dogs, her words falling into the stillness. "Stay with me. You're not dying tonight. Not if I can help it." The shepherd pressed closer, eyes never leaving her face, as if trying to will her to succeed. Only later, as the wounded dog's breathing eased, did Emily notice the pouches sewn into their harnesses. Military issue, waterproof, heavy with secrets. Not lost pets, not by chance. Someone had sent them, here to her on this night, in this storm. A dozen questions crashed through her mind. Why now? Who knew she was here? Was danger following? But when the shepherd rested his massive head on her knee, staring up at her with something fierce and ancient in his eyes, the only thing that mattered was that they had come, that they had found her. Outside, the blizzard raged on. Inside, a fragile circle of warmth and hope flickered to life. Emily didn't know what the night would bring, but as the shepherd's eyes met hers, she realized she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The storm outside showed no sign of mercy, hammering the small cabin with an endless barrage of snow and ice. Inside, the battle was quieter, but no less fierce. Emily working frantically to save a life while shadows of her past flickered at the edges of her mind. The wounded dog lay sprawled on a pile of towels by the wood stove, her breathing ragged, her eyes half-lidded and glazed with pain. Emily moved on autopilot, hands moving with a speed and precision honed years ago, but rusty with disuse. She grabbed a pair of scissors, slicing away the dog's vest and thick fur around the wound. Blood oozed steadily from the jagged gash on her side, staining Emily's hands, pooling darkly against the faded blue towel. "Stay with me, girl. Stay with me," she murmured, voice trembling only slightly, as she drew up a dose of antibiotics and injected it carefully beneath the dog's skin. The German shepherd, Shadow she decided to call him, for the way he seemed to melt in and out of the darkness, hovered close. He pressed his flank against the injured female, offering warmth and reassurance. Emily could feel his gaze on her, watchful and full of intent. It was as if he knew exactly what she was doing and silently willed her to succeed. The third dog, a wiry, anxious male, paced in a nervous circle, whining softly whenever Emily's hands hesitated. As Emily set up a makeshift IV using an old extension tube and the remnants of her field kit, flashes of memory assaulted her. Heat, sirens, men screaming for help as explosions rattled the night sky. She'd knelt in blood-soaked sand before, working frantically on soldiers torn apart by shrapnel, feeling helpless, feeling doomed. The taste of fear was metallic and sharp in her mouth, but she pushed through it, forcing herself to focus. She would not fail. Not again. The storm's fury rose another notch, making the windows shudder in their frames. The lights flickered, the electric heater stuttering, threatening to die. Emily gritted her teeth and pressed on, wrapping the wound with clean gauze and securing it tightly. "You're okay. You're safe here," she whispered, voice cracking. She looked up to see Shadow watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His eyes, brown and deep, held no judgment, only raw trust and expectation. Food was scarce. Emily scooped what was left of her chicken soup into a bowl, letting the dogs lap at the warm broth. She found half a loaf of bread and broke it into pieces, sharing it out while keeping a wary eye on the injured female's breathing. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Suddenly, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the room, except for the trembling orange glow of the wood stove. The storm's noise pressed in, making the little cabin feel even smaller. Max, the anxious dog, darted to the window, hackles raised, barking sharply. Shadow bristled, moving between Emily and the door, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The tension in the room became electric. Something, or someone, was out there, moving in the blizzard's teeth. Emily's hand found her pistol. She crawled to the window, peering into the white chaos outside. All she saw was snow and wind. Her mind spun. Was she being followed? Had the dogs led something, or someone, to her doorstep? The thought made her skin crawl. She remembered nights in the desert, when rescue never came, and the only safety was what you could carve out with your own hands. The dogs pressed close to her, forming a living wall. Emily realized with a start that their vests bore more than just gear. There was a small, waterproof pouch sewn tightly into the injured dog's harness. Her hands, still bloody, fumbled with the latch. Inside, she found a battered military USB drive and a folded note. The paper damp, but the words still clear. If found, bring to Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Brooks, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Her heart skipped a beat. Military code, classified hardware, and a handler's plea for help. Emily's thoughts raced. Where were the handlers? Why send these dogs here in the middle of nowhere? Was it fate or something darker? Had she been chosen, targeted, or was it just coincidence? The note felt heavy in her palm. More than just words, but a responsibility. A summons she could not ignore. Max whined again, staring at the door. Emily set her jaw and loaded another log into the stove, determined to keep the cabin warm no matter what. She rummaged for candles, set them on the table, their flames throwing nervous shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, hope flickered in the smallest ways. Lexi, the name sewn onto the injured dog's collar, was still breathing, her chest rising and falling in slow, even waves. Shadow nuzzled her, then looked back at Emily, a silent thank you in his eyes. Emily felt tears threaten, but she blinked them away. The hours crawled by. Emily checked Lexi's vitals, whispered encouragement, and tried not to let her mind spiral into fear. She was haunted by a familiar dread, the terror of not being enough, of failing when it mattered most. But as Lexi's breathing stabilized, something shifted inside Emily. She had done it. She had saved someone, if only for tonight. As dawn approached, the storm began to ebb. Emily slumped in a chair, exhaustion heavy on her shoulders. The dogs settled around her, forming a rough circle of warmth and trust. The fire hissed, the candles guttered, and for the first time in years, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Shadow moved closer, pressing his head against her leg. She let her fingers drift through his fur, feeling his strength and his silent promise. Maybe she hadn't been chosen by accident. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to make things right. The world outside was frozen and blue in the pre-dawn hour, the storm finally retreating and leaving behind a landscape blanketed in silence. The wind's howl had faded to a low moan, and the only sound inside the cabin was the slow, rhythmic breathing of the dogs and the soft crackle of dying embers in the stove. Emily sat slumped in a worn armchair, legs curled beneath her, a blanket draped across her shoulders. She was bone-tired, but her mind wouldn't let her sleep. She watched Shadow move silently around the room, every step measured and purposeful. The dog circled Lexi's makeshift bed twice before settling beside her, his broad head resting gently across Lexi's back. The sight pulled at something deep inside Emily, some memory of camaraderie, of knowing you were never truly alone, as long as someone was watching your six. Max, the third dog, paced along the far wall, his paws thumping softly against the boards. He kept glancing at the windows, ears flicking toward every small sound. Emily understood that kind of restlessness, the sense that danger always lurked just beyond the circle of light, waiting for you to let your guard down. She felt it too. Sleep would not come easily tonight. She tried anyway. Emily stretched out on the old couch, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other resting on her chest, palm over her pounding heart. But the moment she closed her eyes, the nightmares returned. Sand and blood and metal, hands slick and red, voices screaming across a battlefield she couldn't escape. Guilt gnawed at her from the inside, whispering that she would fail these dogs just as she'd failed so many others. Emily jerked awake with a gasp, cold sweat soaking her hairline. The room was still, but Shadow's gaze was fixed on her, dark and unblinking. He moved closer, nuzzling her hand, grounding her in the present. She let out a shaky breath, pressing her forehead to his. "You're here, huh? Not letting me off the hook." It felt strange to talk aloud, but the words came easily. "You're not going to let me hide, are you?" Shadow's only response was a gentle nudge, as if telling her to get up and try again. She moved quietly to check Lexi's wound. The dog flinched as Emily peeled away the old bandage, but her eyes stayed open, watching Emily with cautious trust. The gash was ugly but clean, the swelling already reduced thanks to the antibiotics and warmth. Emily smiled, just a little. "You're tough," she murmured, running her fingers lightly over Lexi's ears. As dawn crept in, the cabin's chill gave way to the fragile warmth of a new day. Emily made instant coffee, the smell sharp and bitter, and split a protein bar 3 ways for the dogs. She found herself talking to them as she worked, telling them about the weather, her favorite coffee mugs, the little things she missed about life before everything changed. Shadow listened, head cocked, eyes attentive, as if weighing her words. Max hovered close, twitching with nervous energy, while Lexi simply pressed herself against Emily's leg, drawing comfort from the gentle touch. For the first time, Emily really examined the tags on the dogs' collars. She wiped the mud and blood from Shadow's, revealing a serial number and the faint outline of an eagle. Department of Defense issue, no doubt. Lexi's tag was nearly identical, but Max's had an extra engraving, a triangle and the word exfil, exfiltration. These weren't just military dogs. They were special forces, elite K9S trained for classified missions. Their appearance here wasn't a fluke. Somebody had chosen her cabin as their destination. The realization sent a shiver up her spine. Was this a test or a cry for help? Was she being watched even now, monitored by some shadowy agency to see if she'd step up or fail? Or had fate simply brought 3 lost souls to her door on the night she most needed them? The unanswered questions pressed in on her, threatening to overwhelm the fragile peace she'd built. Emily wandered to the window, looking out across the snow-draped woods. The sun was rising, throwing long blue shadows over the drifts. In that moment, she caught her own reflection in the glass. Hair tangled, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but something else flickering there too. Determination. Maybe hope. She turned back to the dogs. "I guess we're all stuck here together," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't know what you need from me, but I'll do my best." Shadow's tail thumped once, heavy and deliberate, and he lifted his head, meeting her gaze. Lexi closed her eyes, finally able to rest. Even Max seemed calmer. His pacing slowed, his ears no longer pinned back with fear. Emily found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the dogs. She let the silence stretch, letting the warmth of their bodies seep into her bones. Her thoughts drifted back to Iraq, her team, the soldiers who'd trusted her, the medic's companion she'd loved and lost. There had been a dog once, just like Shadow, who died in her arms during a mortar attack. She'd never forgiven herself for not saving him. Now maybe she had another chance. For a while she just breathed, letting the ghosts of her past drift through her without taking hold. She reached out and scratched Shadow's chin, whispering, "Let's see where this goes, partner." Outside, the world was still dangerous, uncertain. Inside the cabin, though, something had shifted. Emily wasn't alone anymore, and neither were the dogs. In the hush of the morning, surrounded by silent connections and fragile hope, she decided to try, just for today, to trust the bond they'd begun to build. Morning bled slowly into afternoon, gray light creeping through the frost-blurred windows. Emily moved through her cabin with a sense of cautious purpose, still reeling from the night's adrenaline, but steadier now that she had a mission again: healing, protecting, connecting. Lexi's condition had stabilized overnight. The wounded dog's breath was deeper, her sleep less troubled. Emily took her time redressing the wound, hands gentle but practiced, her focus absolute. She noticed how Shadow and Max positioned themselves between her and the cabin door, always forming a protective barrier. It was more than just loyalty. They were guarding her too, not only Lexi. The realization made her chest tighten. These dogs weren't just her charges, they'd become her keepers as well. Shadow lingered close as Emily worked, occasionally leaning his massive head into her palm. She ran her fingers through his fur, noticing old scars that spoke of battles fought long before last night. A jagged burn scar crossed his left shoulder, and a patch of missing fur marked what must have been a bullet wound, long healed but never forgotten. Emily traced these marks gently, understanding in her bones what it meant to be changed by violence. "You get it, don't you?" she whispered. "You know what it means to carry ghosts." Memories of Iraq slipped in around the edges of her mind, unbidden but vivid. Hot wind, the thunder of mortars, the taste of blood in her mouth. She remembered another dog, a medic's companion, how she'd knelt in the rubble, trying desperately to staunch a wound too deep to heal. That loss had broken something inside her, a piece of faith she'd never managed to reclaim. Now, as her hands cleaned Shadow's coat, she felt something different stirring. Grief, yes, but also gratitude for the chance to try again. Lexi woke with a start, then relaxed as Emily's voice soothed her. The injured dog pressed her nose against Emily's knee, eyes bright and trusting. Max sat nearby, posture tense but attentive, ready to spring at the slightest threat. The cabin, once a sanctuary of isolation, had become a small, fiercely defended world. Emily realized how much her routines had changed. She ate with the dogs, shared what little food she had, even found herself sleeping lighter, her dreams less haunted when Shadow was curled at her feet. Later, as a thin sun climbed higher, Emily opened a window to air out the room, letting in a blast of clean, cold air. The dogs didn't flinch at the sound. Instead, they moved with her, forming a subtle escort as she fetched snowmelt water from a pot outside and checked the perimeter for any sign of new danger. There were only her footprints and those of the dogs. No sign that anyone else had come near. Returning inside, she found Lexi sitting upright, head tilted, paw raised in an oddly deliberate gesture. Emily knelt, and Lexi placed her paw on Emily's knee, holding it there with surprising strength. For a moment, Emily just stared, unsure what to do. Then she laughed softly, tears pricking her eyes. "Guess you're choosing me, huh?" The warmth in that moment pushed away the last vestiges of the night's terror. The bond was real, unspoken, instinctive, but undeniable. Afternoon settled in, golden and quiet. Emily wrote down everything she'd learned about the dogs in an old army notebook. Their markings, the patches on their gear, the medical supplies hidden in their vests. She examined Max's collar again, noting the exfil tag and wondering about his handler. What mission had sent them here and why? Each detail added a new layer to the mystery. The dogs were too well trained, too purposeful to have arrived by accident. Someone had chosen Emily. Someone had trusted her, perhaps as a last hope. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. But it was different from the old guilt. This wasn't failure waiting to happen. It was a second chance, as if the universe, or fate, or maybe just luck, had delivered a test she was finally ready to pass. Later, Emily found herself drifting into memories, but instead of being trapped by them, she let them come and go, watching from a distance. The heat and chaos of Iraq, the laughter of her old unit, the silence that followed every loss. Shadow rested his head in her lap, eyes closed, breathing slow and deep. Lexi, stronger now, lay beside Max, and even the anxious dog seemed more at ease. They were healing together, all of them. Wounded creatures learning to trust, to accept connection, where once there had been only fear. Emily's heart felt raw but lighter, as if every moment spent with the dogs sanded away a little more of her loneliness. She was still afraid, still wary of the world beyond the cabin walls, but she was no longer willing to hide. As dusk crept in, Emily prepared a simple meal, rice and broth, split 4 ways. She ate with the dogs at her feet, the fire crackling and the world outside reduced to a distant memory. When she finished, Lexi leaned against her, and Max curled at her back. The warmth of their bodies a gentle reminder that she was part of something again. Before sleep, Emily sat in silence, letting the peace of the moment settle deep inside her. She didn't know what the next day would bring. Questions still outnumbered answers, and the mystery of why the dogs had come to her door remained unsolved. But for now, she was content to simply be with them, to heal a little more each hour, each breath, each unspoken bond. The next morning brought a brittle calm. Sunlight stabbed through the clouds, sending blinding reflections off the endless snow, painting the white mountains with harsh, crystalline beauty. Emily stood at the cabin door, mug of weak coffee clutched in both hands, surveying the world beyond her fragile sanctuary. For the first time since the dogs arrived, she felt the hush was more ominous than peaceful. Shadow flanked her left side, his fur brushing against her knee, posture rigid and alert. Lexi, surprisingly strong after a night's rest, limped to the edge of the porch and sniffed the wind, while Max circled warily, nose low to the ground. There was tension in the air, a sense of being watched, or maybe just the aftershock of too much danger for too many nights in a row. Emily's boots crunched through the crusted snow as she stepped off the porch. The landscape was transformed by the storm, but something immediately set her nerves on edge. She crouched low, squinting at a patch of churned powder near the woods. There, half concealed by fresh drifts, were boot prints, big, deep, and new. They led from the tree line toward her cabin, then circled back. Not the wide tracks of a lost hiker or the small imprints of local wildlife. These were the purposeful steps of someone who'd come to watch, maybe even wait. She felt the prickling sensation of being hunted, heart thumping loud in her ears. Shadow stiffened, following her gaze, his lips peeled back in a silent snarl. Emily scanned the trees, adrenaline spiking. Her mind ran through scenarios. Rescue team, stranger, or something much worse. Someone who knew exactly what these dogs meant, and what they might be carrying. Trying to steady her nerves, she led the dogs back inside and double-checked the locks. She grabbed the old satellite phone from the kitchen drawer, its casing scratched, battery life a gamble. Her thumb hesitated over the buttons. Who could she trust? The answer came from the memory of the note she'd found on Lexi, the name etched in military code. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Brooks. Static crackled as the connection bounced through orbiting satellites. For a long moment, she thought she'd be met with only silence. Then a clipped, professional voice answered, wary but clear. "This is Brooks. Who is this?" Emily's throat tightened. "This is Sergeant Emily Parker, retired. I found 3 military K9s outside my cabin last night. 1 wounded, all with active tags and a pouch addressed to you. My location is..." She rattled off the GPS coordinates, every syllable tense. The line went dead for 2 seconds. "Keep them safe. Do not attempt to move until I give the all clear. We're sending help, but extraction is complicated. Stay inside. Do not engage. There may be hostile surveillance in your area. Understood?" Emily swallowed. "Understood, ma'am." She hung up, staring at her reflection in the blank screen. Shadow nudged her, as if reading the spike in her anxiety. Emily drew in a steadying breath. The dogs pressed close, forming a semicircle at her feet. A crash echoed from outside. Max darted to the back window, barking furiously. Emily snatched up her pistol, heart in her throat, and peered through the frosted glass. At first she saw nothing, just the wind shaking brittle branches. Then, deep in the shadow of the trees, a dark figure moved, pausing just long enough to meet her gaze before melting back into the woods. She dropped to one knee, voice low and sharp. "Down." The dogs responded instantly, flattening themselves to the floor, ears pricked. Her instincts took over, military training as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. She moved quickly, pulling blackout curtains across the windows, grabbing her emergency pack from under the stairs, and checking the batteries on her radio. Inside, she and the dogs were trapped, outnumbered, outgunned, but not helpless. Emily's mind spun through defensive strategies. She'd once improvised a field hospital out of shipping crates and tarps. Surely she could fortify a cabin with 3 elite K9s on her side. Shadow and Max watched her with laser focus as she started barricading the doors with heavy furniture. She set up tripwires using fishing line and empty cans, her fingers moving with brisk efficiency. Max, picking up on her urgency, fetched a coil of rope from the closet and dropped it at her feet. Emily blinked in surprise, then grinned. "Smart boy," she muttered. While she worked, Lexi hobbled over, licking Emily's hand and nuzzling into her lap. Emily pressed her forehead to Lexi's for a moment, the contact grounding her in the present. "We're gonna get through this, okay?" The promise was for herself as much as for the dogs. Night fell fast, bringing with it the unsettling knowledge that help was not coming soon. The radio crackled to life just before midnight. Brooks's voice, hard, urgent. "Parker, listen. The dogs' last assignment was intercepting a Russian Black Ops team trying to smuggle classified naval tech out of Portsmouth. Their handlers are missing. You and the dogs may be the only witnesses left. If you see anyone, do not engage. Wait for us." Emily's mouth went dry. The scale of the danger hit her all at once. This wasn't just about 3 dogs or her own past. This was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous. She checked the locks a final time and crawled into the center of the room, dogs pressed tight to her sides, pistol within reach. As the wind battered the walls, Emily's resolve hardened. She was no longer just surviving. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, for a new kind of family, for answers. for justice. Shadow settled at her side, Lexi's breath steady and calm, Max's eyes scanning the darkness. In the silence, she realized her trust in the dogs was complete. They'd chosen her, and she was choosing them in return, come what may. Dawn was a thin line of steel across the treetops when Emily awoke, stiff and chilled, from a patchy sleep. She kept her pistol close and her nerves taut, every noise amplified in the hush that followed the storm. The cabin was dim, only a faint glow from the dying embers casting long shadows across the walls. Shadow and Max had taken turns standing guard, their senses sharper than her own, while Lexi slept curled beside Emily, finally resting deeply after so much pain. Emily rose carefully, rubbing the stiffness from her neck, and checked the windows. The world outside looked unchanged. Thick snow, deep woods, the same hush as always. But Emily's sense of safety had changed. The memory of boot prints and that fleeting figure in the trees lingered, sharp as broken glass. She set about making breakfast, oatmeal and the last of her jerky for herself, rice and broth for the dogs. She sat on the floor with them, eating in tense silence, ears tuned for any sound out of place. Lexi, though still limping, seemed stronger, nosing at her food and even nudging Emily's hand in search of more. It didn't last. Shadow, while licking his bowl, froze, ears pricked, eyes locked on the far corner of the cabin. He moved with sudden, silent urgency, pressing his nose along the wall and pawing at a baseboard. Emily watched, curiosity turning quickly to alarm as Shadow found a thin wire stretched low across the floorboards. Her breath caught. A tripwire, one she'd missed despite her careful sweeps. Shadow looked up at her, tail stiff, as if to say, "You're welcome." Emily knelt, tracing the wire to its anchor, an improvised alert that would have set off a loud can and string rattle if someone crossed it. She shook her head in wonder, then dread. If she'd missed this, what else might she have missed? Suddenly Max barked, sharp and urgent. Emily bolted upright, heart thundering. Through the frosted window, she saw a black drone skimming the treetops, camera blinking red, scanning the area with silent menace. The dogs pressed close as if forming a living shield. Emily drew the curtains tight and shut off the stove's small vent, reducing heat signature as best she could. She realized they couldn't stay here. Not with their position compromised. Not with surveillance tightening around them like a noose. She packed quickly, moving essentials and emergency supplies into her old army rucksack. She dressed Lexi's wounds again, double-checking the bandages. The dogs seemed to understand. They waited by the door, poised for her command. Outside, the air was razor cold, the silence oppressive. Emily led the group across the clearing and toward a storage shed deeper in the woods, a fallback she'd prepared long ago, fortified with sandbags and covered in snow camouflage. She sent Max ahead, his training obvious as he swept the path for tripwires or hidden threats. Shadow stayed at Emily's flank, his presence both anchor and reassurance. Lexi limped gamely, never letting herself fall behind. They reached the shed without incident. Inside, Emily set about fortifying their new position. Windows covered, supplies inventoried, escape routes marked. She set decoy bundles back at the cabin, hoping to mislead any pursuers, and strung up a crude perimeter alarm using bells and thin wire. Every move was calculated, every minute precious. While settling in, Emily remembered the waterproof pouch from Lexi's harness. With trembling hands, she fished it out and examined it again. Along with the note and the USB drive, she found a small slip of paper, numbers and symbols, clearly a code. Her first instinct was to try and unlock the drive, desperate for answers. But paranoia crept in. What if it was tracked? What if opening it sent a signal to whoever was searching for them? Emily stuffed the drive back into the pouch, making the hardest decision: to wait. Shadow watched her intently, as if sensing the weight of her choice. Emily reached out and scratched his ear. "Not yet, buddy. Too risky." The hours crawled by. The snow muffled every sound, but Emily's mind raced. She listened for drones, scanned for footprints, replayed Brooke's words over and over. "Extraction is complicated. Hostiles may be in your area." Each time the radio crackled, her heart leapt, but it was only static. She checked and rechecked her perimeter, barely letting herself rest. By evening, Lexi could stand on her own. She paced the shed, following Emily's every move. Max guarded the door with obsessive vigilance. Shadow pressed his weight against Emily whenever she faltered, grounding her with his warmth. The constant threat outside was like a physical presence, making her every muscle ache with tension. Yet in the midst of this, Emily felt her sense of responsibility deepen. The dogs were her mission, her family now, and she would die before letting anything happen to them. Her thoughts kept circling back to the code. Why hide it on Lexi? What secrets did it unlock? And who wanted it so badly they'd risk a covert assault in the New Hampshire wilderness? Emily's paranoia grew, but so did her determination. Late at night, as snow began falling again, Emily huddled with the dogs. Shadow nudged her chin up, meeting her gaze with fierce intelligence. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own stubborn will, the same refusal to give up, no matter how long the odds. She stroked his head, whispering, "We're not just running anymore. We're fighting back. Whatever they want, they'll have to go through us." Outside, the darkness pressed close, hiding friends or foes. Inside, Emily and her unlikely pack were united, every sense tuned to the next threat, every heartbeat a silent promise. "I will protect you, no matter what comes." The second night in the shed was colder, and Emily could feel fatigue working its way into her bones. Her head throbbed with exhaustion, and the relentless stress of waiting for an attack or a rescue stretched her nerves raw. The dogs sensed it, staying close, barely leaving her side even as she paced or sat watching the door, gun in her lap. A thin dawn filtered through cracks in the wood. Emily boiled water on a camping stove, rationing out the last of her tea and beef jerky. She fed Lexi another dose of antibiotics, pleased to see the dog's tail wag. Just once, but it was a victory. Max stood sentinel at the door, his posture tense and alert, while Shadow never strayed more than an arm's reach from Emily. She was just wiping out her mug when a low hum vibrated in the silence. So faint she wondered if she imagined it. Shadow heard it too. He lifted his head, ears pointed, eyes sharp. Emily pressed herself to the wall, watching through a tiny slit in the planks. Down the old forest road, headlights flickered in the morning mist, a military SUV crawling slowly over the ruts and snowbanks. Emily's first reaction was suspicion. Enemy? Brooks's team? Or something worse? Her hands tightened on the pistol. The SUV stopped 100 yards away, engine idling. The dogs growled low, warning rumbles vibrating in their chests. Emily hushed them, straining to see. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, bundled in military parka and watch cap, her movements brisk and deliberate. She advanced slowly, hands visible, eyes scanning the trees. When she drew close enough for Emily to see her face, she felt her breath hitch. "Captain Melissa Ford," the woman called softly, voice familiar in a way that punched through Emily's fog of fear. "Echo 6, Army Medical. I know you're in there, Parker. Shadow, heal." Shadow barked once, tail wagging for the first time since he'd arrived. Emily nearly collapsed with relief. "Hold positions," she murmured to Max and Lexi. Then she unlatched the door, swinging it open just enough to peer out. "Ford? Prove it," Emily demanded, voice steely. Ford grinned, flashing her army medallion and reciting a code phrase only someone from Emily's past would know. Shadow bounded over and nuzzled Ford, who knelt and scratched his chin with practiced affection. "He's a good judge of character," Ford said, giving Emily a tired but genuine smile. Inside the shed, the tension finally broke, replaced by an overwhelming mix of relief, gratitude, and new anxiety. Ford ducked inside, eyes sweeping the makeshift shelter, nodding at Emily's defenses and the dogs. "You've done good work here," she said. "Brooks sent me. Your file says you don't quit under fire." Emily felt herself flush, embarrassed by the compliment, afraid of what it meant. "Where's the rest of your team?" she asked. Ford shook her head. "I'm it for now. Extraction's still on hold. Hostiles are in the region, possibly tracking the dogs. I had to come in quiet." She lowered her voice. "Lexi's original handler, Tom Reynolds, is missing. Last seen fighting off Russian agents at the shipyard perimeter. Command believes the dogs were sent to you because Reynolds trusted you more than anyone left on the inside. You were their backup plan." The implications sank in. Emily's fingers found Shadow's collar, gripping tight. "So the mission, this drive, they're all counting on me?" she whispered. Ford nodded, her expression grim. "And not just you. These dogs are the only survivors of the operation. The rest, we're not sure. There's a real chance enemy assets are close by. You're compromised, Parker. We have to move fast." Max sniffed Ford, then sat, tail thumping, his silent acceptance. Lexi nuzzled Ford's hand, earning a gentle pat. Emily felt the pressure building behind her eyes, threatening to spill over. "We're outnumbered," she managed. "Supplies are low. If we get attacked, we might not make it." Ford put a firm hand on Emily's shoulder. "You've survived worse, and you're not alone. These dogs," she gestured to the trio, "they're not just assets. They're family. They chose you for a reason." Emily managed a crooked smile, the weight of her isolation lessening. "You got a plan?" Ford outlined a strategy. "We hold here, keep low, reinforce the shed. I'll monitor radio and scout the perimeter. Extraction will come, but we need to hold the line until then. If hostiles find us, we use the emergency beacon, last resort only. And Parker, if it gets bad, your job is to protect that drive and those dogs, at all costs." As Ford set up a small encrypted radio and distributed her emergency rations, Emily felt a sense of hope she hadn't known in years. Someone from her past, someone who knew her pain and her strengths, had come for her. Not to judge, but to fight alongside her. Shadow curled up between the two women. Lexi sprawled at their feet. Max lay by the door, a silent but powerful shield. For the first time since the storm began, Emily felt the tide shifting. The old dread lingered. Danger was closer than ever, and the risk higher. But she no longer felt alone, and that made all the difference. Night fell. The world outside pitch black and full of unknowns. Inside the shed, the circle of trust was unbroken. Emily checked the drive once more, then tucked it safely away. The dogs sighed and settled in. Ford leaned back, whispering, "Get some rest. You'll need it." Emily let herself close her eyes, the sounds of her new family breathing around her. She was ready for whatever came next. No matter how dark the night, she would not give up. The shed became a war room as dusk settled over the snow-locked mountains, the sky tinged with bruised purple and steel. Inside, Emily and Captain Ford went over every detail, their voices low and urgent. The dogs circled restlessly, sensing the tension, pacing and listening, eyes fixed on the door. Supplies were organized, escape routes mapped, and the battered radio kept crackling with intermittent static. Outside, the wind had died, but it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. Emily pressed her forehead to the cold window pane, watching for movement among the trees. "They could come tonight," she whispered. Ford nodded grimly. "That's what I'd do if I were them. No one expects a hit in weather like this." Ford outlined the plan. They would split up. Emily and Shadow would attempt to find Reynolds, Lexi's missing handler, whose emergency beacon had pinged a mile north. Ford would stay behind with Max and Lexi, turning the shed into a final redoubt to delay any attackers. The plan was risky. Every move could be their last. Shadow seemed to understand before anyone spoke. He pressed close to Emily, eyes gleaming with intelligence and resolve. She knelt, adjusting his vest and whispering, "I need you, boy. One more time." Shadow butted her chin with his nose, tail flicking, as if to say, "Let's go." They slipped into the woods, leaving behind the fragile light of the shed. The snow crunched softly beneath Emily's boots, each step deliberate and careful. Shadow led, nose to the ground, weaving through thickets and over fallen logs with practiced ease. The world shrank to the beam of Emily's headlamp, the ghostly silver trail of Shadow's breath, and the distant echo of gunfire. Faint, but real. Every shadow looked like a threat. Emily's senses sharpened, training taking over. She scanned for tripwires, scanned for the glint of rifle barrels, listened for the whisper of enemy voices. When her nerves threatened to buckle, Shadow brushed against her thigh, grounding her. She spoke softly, almost chanting. "Not alone. Not tonight." The sound of a struggle broke the stillness. Gunfire crackled, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. Shadow bolted forward, Emily stumbling after him, branches slapping her face. She nearly lost her footing but caught herself on a frozen sapling. There, huddled beneath a fallen tree, was a man in battered winter camouflage, bleeding from a shoulder wound, one hand clutching a sidearm. "Reynolds!" Emily hissed, dropping to her knees. She tore open her kit, adrenaline burning away her fear. Shadow circled the perimeter, hackles raised, as Emily worked to staunch the bleeding. Reynolds' eyes fluttered open, disbelief and relief written plain across his face. "Thought you were a dream," he gasped. "Didn't think anyone would come." Emily smiled grimly, fighting tears. "You're not getting rid of us that easy." Gunfire shattered the moment. Shadow lunged, barking furiously, and a dark-clad figure emerged from the trees, weapon raised. Emily ducked, pulling Reynolds to the ground, as bullets chewed up the snow nearby. She fired back, aiming low as Shadow sprinted at the attacker, teeth bared. The fight was chaotic, frantic. Shouts, the crack of rifles, Shadow's ferocious growl. The enemy retreated, but not for long. "Move!" Emily barked, slinging Reynolds' arm over her shoulder. Shadow led the way, backtracking through the trees, always alert, always between Emily and the line of fire. They crashed through the underbrush, ice and branches tearing at their clothes, lungs burning with effort. Ford's voice crackled over the radio, strained and urgent. "Contact front! Multiple hostiles! Emily, do you copy?" Emily pressed her calm, breath ragged. "Coming in hot. Have Reynolds, need cover." At the shed, Ford and Max were already dug in. Lexi, limping but determined, stood ready, barking in challenge. Emily, Reynolds, and Shadow burst into the clearing just as the first shots struck the shed's side. Ford laid down covering fire, Max launching himself at a figure trying to circle around. The snow erupted in chaos. Gunfire, barks, the sharp commands of battle. Emily dragged Reynolds behind a barricade of crates, ripping open his jacket and pressing gauze to the wound. "Hold still," she muttered, fingers slick with blood and snow. Shadow never left her side, snarling at anyone who drew near. Lexi lunged to intercept another attacker, her jaws snapping inches from his leg. Ford kept calling out positions, her voice a calm center in the storm. For a moment, it seemed the attackers would overwhelm them. Then, as suddenly as it began, the gunfire ebbed. The attackers melted back into the trees, taking their wounded with them. Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute, broken only by the dogs panting and Reynolds' pained breathing. Ford slumped beside Emily, face streaked with sweat and soot. "That was too close," Emily nodded, wiping blood from her knuckles. "You think that's it?" Ford shook her head. "No way. They'll regroup. We need to get out. Soon." Reynolds forced a grim smile. "The drive. It's more important than you know." He explained in a halting whisper how the device contained evidence of a massive cyber attack plot targeting U.S. naval systems. If the drive fell into enemy hands, the consequences would be catastrophic. Emily felt the responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mountain. Shadow curled up beside her, muzzle resting on her thigh, watching her with unwavering trust. For the first time, Emily realized how much she depended on that faith. "We're not giving up," she said softly. "Not now, not ever." The group huddled together, battered but unbroken. Night crept in again, wrapping the cabin in darkness. They would not sleep, not tonight. The final stand was coming, and Emily knew whatever happened, they would face it together. Inside the battered shed, a tense calm settled as night pressed down on the world outside. Emily checked her weapon, hands shaking from adrenaline, exhaustion, and a cold that seemed to seep into her bones. Shadow watched her every move, eyes dark and steady, never straying from her side. Reynolds leaned against the far wall, his breathing labored but steady, his wound bandaged, an arm in a makeshift sling. Captain Ford moved with brisk efficiency, reinforcing barricades, checking the radio, and offering Max and Lexi quiet praise. Emily's mind spun. She could almost hear the forest breathing, the silence charged with anticipation. She caught herself listening not just for human enemies, but for the doubts that crept in at every lull. The old voice whispered, "You'll fail them. You'll break when it counts." The memories surged. Nights in Iraq when the medevac never came, the feeling of helplessness as the sand soaked up blood, and the unending ache of loss. She tried to push those memories aside, but they remained, stubborn and insistent. She knelt beside Shadow, pressing her forehead to his. His heartbeat thudded, solid and unyielding, a counter-rhythm to her own anxiety. "You picked me for a reason, didn't you?" she murmured. Shadow's only answer was a gentle sigh, the slow rise and fall of his chest anchoring her to the present. Ford crouched nearby, voice low. "You know, when Reynolds picked you for the fallback plan, I thought he was crazy. Too much risk, too much trauma." She smiled wryly. "But he said the dogs would know who to trust. He said you wouldn't quit, no matter how bad it got." Emily almost laughed, but the emotion stuck in her throat. "He could have been wrong," she whispered. Reynolds spoke up from the shadows, his voice rough but sure. "He wasn't. You think we just picked names out of a hat? I saw you in Ramadi. I saw what you did, what you carried for us when no one else could." He nodded to the dogs. They see it too. They're trained to pick up on things. Integrity, leadership, courage. They picked you because you've got all three, even when you don't believe it. Emily felt the weight of those words, the truth of them like a stone dropped into deep water. She wanted to argue, to shrink away, but Shadow pressed closer, his head in her lap. She stroked his fur, breathing deep, feeling her fear slowly transform, not disappear, but shift into something she could use. Resolve, not dread. Outside, movement flickered in the darkness. Max growled, low and warning, and Ford snapped to alert. "Positions!" she barked. Everyone moved with silent urgency. Emily at the far wall, Ford covering the door, Reynolds clutching the pistol with his good hand. Shadow stood guard at Emily's side, Lexi at Reynolds's feet, Max by Ford's heel. The attackers came just after midnight, swift and organized. Gunfire shattered the stillness. Bullets ripped into the barricades, splintering wood and spraying snow across the floor. Emily returned fire, her hands steady, every motion automatic, muscle memory from another life. Shadow lunged at the nearest window, barking furiously, his presence a living shield between Emily and the storm of violence. Between volleys, Reynolds pulled Emily close, voice raw. "If it comes to it, get out. Take the drive and the dogs. Leave me." She shook her head, stubborn. "That's not happening. We go together, or not at all." For the first time, Reynolds smiled. The siege dragged on, minutes blurring into hours. Ford barked orders. Max leaped at a figure that tried to breach the door, and Lexi, though wounded, snapped at hands that reached through broken boards. Emily felt herself moving beyond fear, into a cold clarity, every decision, every shot, every step made not for herself, but for the people and animals who had come to depend on her. A lull fell. The attackers retreated to regroup. Emily slumped to the floor, lungs heaving, sweat freezing on her brow. Ford slid down beside her, grinning fiercely. "Didn't think you had it in you." Emily managed a shaky laugh. "Neither did I." Reynolds spoke, softer now. "You know, you're not just patching up wounds tonight. You're saving all of us, in more ways than you know." His words sank in. Emily looked around, at Shadow's watchful eyes, Lexi's quiet strength, Max's unwavering loyalty, and Ford's battle-worn confidence. She realized she had become their center, their handler, their anchor. For a moment, the old fear surged. "I'm still broken. Still not enough." But then she looked at Shadow, at the absolute trust in his gaze, and something inside her shifted. She saw not the sum of her scars, but the strength they'd given her. She saw how pain had made her more empathetic, more determined, more willing to risk everything for the ones she loved. The final assault came just before dawn, a desperate, chaotic rush. The attackers, knowing time was running out, charged with everything they had. The defenders held fast. Emily fought with everything left in her, her training, her instincts, her love for the battered, loyal pack at her side. When it was over, silence fell hard and sudden. The shed was battered, splinters and spent shells scattered everywhere, but they had survived. The attackers melted into the woods, defeated. As the sky turned pale with morning, Emily let herself collapse. Shadow pressed tight to her side. Ford squeezed her shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "We all did." Emily realized, in that bruised quiet, that she was no longer the woman who hid from the world. She was something new, wounded, yes, but unbreakable, forged by loyalty and love, and by the courage to stand for others even when fear screamed at her to run. Shadow rested his head in her lap, as if to say, "You are home." The first rays of sunlight bled through the battered slats of the shed, illuminating the aftermath of the night's battle. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the soft panting of the dogs and the distant crackle of a helicopter approaching through the cold morning sky. Emily sat with her back to the wall, knees drawn up, Shadow's head resting in her lap. She didn't know how long she stayed there, letting the weight and wonder of survival soak into her bones. The shed was a mess, splintered wood, blackened from muzzle flashes, flecks of blood, shell casings, and the scattered remnants of everything they'd used to hold the line. Reynolds lay propped against a crate, his color better now. Ford knelt nearby, quietly bandaging her own arm with the same steady hands she'd once used in the field. Max and Lexi watched the windows, tails thumping weakly, too tired for vigilance but unwilling to relax fully until the fight was truly over. Then the thumping grew louder, wind whipping through the trees as the helicopter set down in a clearing beyond the shed. Emily felt her whole body tense, bracing for disappointment or danger. After so much chaos, trust did not come easily. But this time, when the doors opened, it was familiar faces that appeared. Rescue, uniforms, the insignia of her old unit, and Brooks herself striding through the snow with purpose. Ford moved first, waving her arm and shouting, "Here!" Within minutes, the rescue team fanned out, securing the perimeter, lifting Reynolds onto a stretcher, and quickly evaluating Lexi and the other dogs for injuries. Brooks knelt beside Emily, eyes fierce and kind. "You did well, Parker. All of you did." Emily tried to stand, but swayed, muscles rubbery with exhaustion and relief. Shadow steadied her, pressing his massive head against her hip. "We held the line," Emily managed, voice raw. "We didn't let them have the drive." Brooks smiled. "You did more than that. You brought them all home." As the others prepared for departure, Emily took one last look at the ruined shed, their fortress, their crucible, the place where everything had changed. She gathered the drive, tucking it into a waterproof pouch, and pressed it into Brooks's gloved hand. "Evidence of a cyber attack plot," she said. "It can't fall into the wrong hands." Brooks nodded gravely, slipping the drive into her own vest. Loading up in the chopper was a blur. Reynolds was taken first, IV in arm, face streaked with relief and gratitude. Lexi rode beside him, head on his thigh, refusing to be separated from her handler again. Max took his place at Ford's feet, both of them battered but unbowed. Shadow stayed glued to Emily's side, refusing to leave her even for a second. As the helicopter lifted off, Emily looked down and saw the snow falling softly. No longer a storm, but a gentle hush, covering the scars of battle with the promise of a new beginning. The world felt different as they flew over the white mountains, lighter, as if the struggle and pain of the last few days had made room for something new. Emily pressed her forehead to the cold window, watching the horizon unfurl. Shadow leaned in, his warm breath fogging the glass. For a moment, it felt like everything was possible again. In the days that followed, the story became a blur of hospitals, paperwork, and briefings. Reynolds underwent surgery and began his slow road to recovery. Ford and Max received commendations for bravery under fire. Lexi was recognized as a hero, her wounds treated, her loyalty celebrated. Emily, for her part, found herself called into debrief after debrief, each time asked to recount the moments of the siege, the decision to trust, the courage to stand and fight. But the real transformation happened in the quiet moments, the ones no report would ever capture. Emily visited Reynolds in the hospital, bringing Shadow along. The dogs greeted each other like old friends, nuzzling and playing, as if the horrors of battle were already fading. Emily sat by Reynolds' bedside, trading stories, sharing laughter, finding comfort in shared pain. Brooks offered her a chance to train a new generation of K-9 handlers at the naval base, a way to pass on the lessons she'd learned, to forge new bonds of trust and loyalty. Emily hesitated at first, worried she wasn't ready. But with Shadow at her side, the answer came easily. "I'll do it," she said, "but only if he's my partner." Brooks just smiled. Shadow became not just Emily's companion but her anchor, a living reminder that healing was possible even when the wounds ran deep. She adopted him officially, signing the papers with a hand that only trembled a little. They moved into a small cottage near the base, with enough land for the dogs to roam and the mountains never far from view. One crisp morning, Emily sat at her kitchen table, pen in hand, writing a letter to an old friend, a fellow veteran who she knew was still fighting her own battles. She wrote, "Some days the storms will feel endless, and the world will seem too heavy to bear. But open the door anyway. Sometimes what you find on the other side is exactly what you need, to remind you you're not alone. Scars are not shame. They're proof you survived. And sometimes, they're the very thing that lets you love again." Shadow padded over and rested his head in her lap as she finished the letter. Emily smiled, ruffling his ears. Outside, snow fell gently, blanketing the world in peace. Hope is never as far away as it feels. Look for the bonds that hold you up in the storm. Friends, family, or even a loyal dog. Honor every act of service, and never underestimate the power of second chances. Healing is never about forgetting your scars. It's about letting them teach you to love, to stand, and to open your heart again. If you found something in this story, courage, comfort, or hope, like and follow our channel. There's always another door to open, another chance to begin again.